Okay, well, Bojo. And then in the way Magan Adok, Anishinaabe Bungi Atego, Inda, Anishinaabe Moen. That means I only know a little bit of Ojibwe. Gaga Gige, Anishinaabe Kwe, Indao, Wabshashi Dodem, Nisue Gamikwe, Indigo. Gachimnasing in Donjaba, Port Severn Dinda, Mio o Minik wa Ike Doyan Nongum. I'm happy to see you all today. Miigwech Bizendawieg. Thank you for listening to me. All right, so here we are, and there I am. I just want to welcome you all. Just pulling up my thing. Welcome everyone to the inaugural seminar series at the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change at York University. This is our winter edition, the second one. In this fall, we had 4 conversations, and this is the second of our winter sessions. This talk is also part of a 4th year undergrad class that I teach called Art in Action, Pedagogy, Ethics, and Praxis, and my 2nd year class, Community Art for Social Change, are also going to be at least watching this video. So I teach these courses here at the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change at York. So I just want to say welcome to everyone, including my students. And these talks have in part centered in Indigenous food, around Indigenous food, but has also reached across communities. And I want to acknowledge that, you know, at this time we're facing intensity on different levels. These times are difficult, you know, we're often isolated, experiencing this intensity in a state of isolation. And so many of us are, experiencing it in that way. And also that this time amplifies already difficult conditions for so many people. And that manifests in many forms. You know, different kinds of oppressions that we experience every day, whether it be the systemic racism within the institutions and within the specific institutions we work in, or the institution of the state of Canada, from microaggressions to overt racisms that are experienced every day can be quite devastating. And I want to just acknowledge that these things right now might be amplified, and that we also experience them like in isolation. So just bringing it back to this gathering today and the ongoing speaker series, I see these conversations, and I'm hoping anyway that we find connections through these conversations, alignments, and in some cases collective voices. And we can do that through talking about food or community and growing. And today I think we're thinking about relations with plants and gardens, and also how that connects to different ways of care, taking care. So today's talk also we are considering arts as gardens, as art, as relations. And for me, this is about what we learn from plants, and also working at the pace of these beings, of these ecologies, and what do we learn about care when we're doing that? And what do we learn about our positions within these ecologies? And maybe ecologies isn't even the right word, but I guess I want to think about like within all those relations. And in relation to, you know, living beings around us. So I think I'm also curious what institutions learn when they take care, or what they learn about care from these practices with gardens or growing. I think that our conversation will touch on these things, or not, maybe. I think this conversation will take us in many different places today, so I'm excited. I just want to acknowledge a lot of the work that I do, and I think, you know, when a lot of the work I do, I use acknowledgement, and sorry, I'm losing the word that I want to add to this. I make acknowledgement to my surroundings, you know. And anyway, I'm gonna read this. Is this from York University? We recognize that many Indigenous nations have longstanding relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Tekaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Also, I want to acknowledge all the land defenders and urge you to consider where you are right now and make acknowledgements there of that Indigenous land that you're on. And right now I'm actually I'm in Midland, Ontario, so it's not in Toronto, and it's very not far from Beausoleil First Nation, Chimnasing, and part of the Williams Treaty. And so I wanted to just mention those things and acknowledge that. I think that yeah, I'll just say that. I want to also make some more acknowledgements. Thank all the speakers and my colleagues, Dana Prieto and Sheila Kola, who for their contributions and support in creating this speaker series. And thank you to all my colleagues at Environmental and Urban Change. I also want to acknowledge support from the faculty, our faculty, Environmental and Urban Change, for funds to support this series, from also funding from New Frontiers and the York Sustainability Innovation Fund for making it possible to bring so many people together for this series of conversations. I also want to humbly say I so appreciate the generosity of Crystal, Andrea, Ursula, and Christina today to coming together. Crystal, Ursula, and Christina will be presenting today with me, and Andrea will be here listening today. In this way, she supports our conversation in this generative space of bringing us all together in talking and making the world be different as we bring land and place into this conversation between us. So Miigwech, Andrea, we're so happy to have you here with us. As you know, this roundtable will delve into contemporary artistic and curatorial meditations on working with gardens, plants, seeds, harvesting, and other land-centered practices, both inside and beyond the spatial and temporal confines of art institutions. I'm going to moderate this conversation, but I'll also open, this is a little different this time, because I'm going to open with some reflections of my thoughts around tending to and researching Mike Mcdonald's butterfly garden works. And then we'll go into presentations with Ursula Johnson, Crystal Mowry, and Christina Battle. And I think, I'm looking forward to this conversation, really. So really building up to it here. So this idea of a round table, we've kind of had conversation panels. This idea of a round table was to bring more people together in this session to be in conversation and think together, and to think about maybe a question, sort of center our work, or our response to a question about like the transformative relations, whether those are like the cycles, the timing and pacing, relations between human and non-human beings, or more than human beings, and or forms of care. What kinds of transformative relations have we experienced when working with aki, or gardens, or land, or trees, or whatever these beings are, whatever this kind of name we want to give it. So I guess that's the kind of question we're asking. What are these? What affects us about this? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to now read the bios of our guests here, and then I'm going to go into a presentation of my work with and my research with Mcdonald's gardens, and then the presentations, each speaker will present, and then we're going to have some questions and conversation after that. if you do have any questions, you can put them in the chat. I'm not sure if we'll get to them today, but we will make sure that we forward them to and share them with our speakers, and we'll just see how timing goes. All right, so as I said, Andrea Fatona is here as a listener, as a person here with us supporting and part of the conversation in a listening capacity. So Andrea Fatona is an independent curator and an associate professor at the Ontario College of Art and Design University. She is concerned with issues of equity within the sphere of the arts and the pedagogical possibilities of artworks produced by other Canadians in articulating broader perspectives of Canadian identities. Her broader interest is in the ways in which art, culture, and education can be employed to illuminate complex issues that pertain to social justice, citizenship, belonging, and nationhood. She is the recipient of awards from Canada Council of the Arts, Ontario Arts Council, and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and was the 2017-2018 OCAD-U Massey Fellow. She is currently a research chair Research Chair 2 in Faculty of Art. Fatona has published scholarly articles, catalog essays, and book chapters in a range of publications. Thanks for being here, Andrea. Christina Battle is an Edmonton-based multimedia artist, curator, and educator whose work unpacks the ongoing disasters happening in our world because of problems with large-scale systems. Her work invites conversations about diverse yet related concerns, such as loss of ecosystems, ongoing pressures of colonialism, and systemic racism. Likewise, Battle's education background is diverse, connecting subjects and locations across North America. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in environmental biology from the University of Alberta, a certificate in film studies from Ryerson University, a Master's of Fine Art from the San Francisco Art Institute, and a PhD in Art and Visual Culture from the University of Western Ontario. Her work has a strong relationship with technology, incorporating video and audio, digital modes of communication such as GIFs, and thinking about how we collect and interpret data from such advanced technologies as satellites. Crystal Mowry is Senior Curator at the Kitchener-Waterloo Art Gallery. Her work often explores the tensions between perceived authenticity and troubled forms of representation. As a curator operating primarily within the context of a public art museum, she treats her role as equal parts co-conspirator and translator, often seeking ways to support artists in the development of new projects. Her curatorial work includes group exhibitions such as The Brain is Wider Than the Sky, I'll Be Your Mirror, and The Perennials, as well as solo projects in 2020 with Deanna Bowen and Aislinn Thomas. She has received Exhibition of the Year awards from the Ontario Association of Art Galleries for her solo projects with Ontario-based artists Maggie Grote and Ernest Deitweller. She has written curatorial and experimental texts for various artist-focused initiatives, including Still Move, a monograph on the performance and installation work of Brendan Fernandez, for which she also served as an editor. It's great to have you here, Crystal. Ursula Johnson also exhibited work nationally and internationally since graduating from NASCAD in 2006. Johnson describes her work as changing mediums based on who I'm talking to, and what conversations I'm trying to have. A major focus of her practice is based in performance and installation. Much of her work employs cooperative didactic intervention and is place-based while incorporating various mediums and often collaboration with others. Johnson has also been collaborating with her spouse, Angela Parsons, under the collaborative duo Canuck. Johnson and Parsons have created works that explore notions of public versus private within the scope of the interpersonal nature of their relationship and cultural difference and sameness. Johnson has been shortlisted for the Salt Spring National Art Prize 2015 and the Nova Scotia Masterworks Award 2016. She was a recipient of the I always say Hatishan. Oh, Hatishan. Yeah, that's good. Foundation Reveal Indigenous Arts Award 2016 and winner of the 2017 Sobey Art Award. Johnson's work, Moose Fence, won the 2019 Nova Scotia Masterworks Award. Is it NS? Nova Scotia. I'm going to say Nova Scotia. All right. Those are the amazing people that we have here today. And now that I've read all of those wonderful bios, and you know who's here in the room, I'm going to start things off by talking about my research with Mike Mcdonald's Gardens. And in this way, I guess I'm in some ways, by showing you and talking to you about this work, it kind of explains why I wanted to bring this conversation together. So that's my excuse for being a presenter and a moderator all at once. Okay, I'm gonna talk a little bit about these. I'm gonna talk a little bit about this research, and then I'm gonna concentrate on a little bit of my experience in one of the gardens, and like I think concentrate on how I think and reflect on learning about care, and I think I've learned a lot about that from Mike Mcdonald's Butterfly Garden. So I'm going to read a little bit, and then I'll talk a little bit off the top of my head, just so you understand what's happening here. So I'm thinking through, you know, these butterfly garden artworks by the late Mi'kmaq artist Mike Mcdonald, and also you can't think about these things in isolation. Because his video art and documentary work are also informing these spaces of cultivation. He makes visible in his documentary. He makes visible contested lands that implicate resource extraction in its degradation, and often undermines access to land for Indigenous people. His work helps me think about scale and legibility of land by considering how the garden artworks he planted across what we know as Canada were firmly rooted and informed by his documentary and video making. So I'm going to just talk about his garden. So if you don't know who Mike Mcdonald is, I don't know if somebody unmuted themselves. I don't know if you can mute yourself there. Just, I can hear you. Anyway, Mike Mcdonald was born in Mi'kmaq territory in Sydney, Nova Scotia in 1942. And he lived for many years in Vancouver. And he started making documentaries in the late 70s for anti-nuclear activist groups. And then by the 80s, he dedicated his video work to Indigenous issues, making documentaries for the Native Brotherhood. One is Niska survival, and around the AMAC's dumping of mining tailings into Alice Arm, northern BC, and other ones around logging on Mears Island, just to name a couple. He's exhibited his work nationally and internationally, and you know, his work is part of like major collections: the National Gallery, Vancouver Art Gallery of Ontario, Kamloops Art Gallery. And then later in his career, he started planting these gardens. And one of the origin stories of his gardens was that he was working with the Wet'suwet'en, and he was working with some elders. He was working with the Wet'suwet'en and Gitxsan when they made their claim for Aboriginal title of their lands against the state in the late 80s. And he was hired to document testimony of elders who were not mobile enough to offer their testimonies in court. So he had his video camera there in that interior BC northern area, and documenting testimony for court. And he was taking photos. He was also working on a medicine plant project with the elders and community members. And he was taking photos of plants and video in the valley near Kitwanga, BC. And he, as he said it, butterflies kept getting into his pictures. And so he started showing these, the elders his pictures of the butterflies. And one elder in particular explained that the butterflies would show him the medicine plants that he needed to keep him healthy. And that, you know, he started being, and then it seemed to me that his research and as an artist was really looking at the relationships between those medicine plants and those butterflies, and then also the healing of these plants. So here's the entrance. You might be familiar. When I started looking at this a couple of years ago, the only garden that I really knew of Mike Mcdonald's still as an artwork was at the Banff Center. And this garden is part of the holdings of the Walter Phillips Gallery. So it's an artwork that is in the collection. And that is part of, so this artwork is part of the artworks that would be taken care of by the Walter Phillips Gallery. So this is the entranceway. So that was the one garden that I knew of. And, you know, I realize now, thinking back, I've made broad statements like the only garden that exists still is the one at Banff, but I realized that that was just to my knowledge, and that maybe there are more cultivated. I just haven't come across them. A lot of them are gone. So yeah, here's a picture of Mike. And as I said, mentioned a few things that's about his work with the elders here. And I think that story of him, you know, learning about and seeing those medicine plants and gardens in that valley was sort of the seed to the beginning of his gardens. And as I said, his artwork, he also made artwork when he was in the Gitxsan territory, and Electronic Totem is part of that artwork that came from some of that. And it was intentionally conveying the very positive bonds that Gitxsan people have with their territory. So there was the dip netting, salmon fishing, as well as berry picking, or the videos all portrayed all of these really important parts of the bond to the land. And not only that, also the songs, the elder Mary Johnson, who's singing a song that also is evidence and also part of that connection to that land, and tells the story of that connection to the land. Here's a map that Dana created of the places and the locations of the gardens across the country that we're aware of, and that there are some that we found out since we've started this, where they were less documented little gardens where Mike would show up to plant or to install some of his video work, and just you know, suggest that he could plant a garden for the gallery. So a lot of these are at different art galleries, and most of them are around different art galleries. And the gardens have different forms, but this was one that with Crystal Mowry and I traveled from Kitchener-Waterloo Art Gallery over to the Woodland Cultural Center to talk to Naomi Johnson a couple of years ago, to ask about this garden. And this is a garden that was curated, that was one of Mike's gardens, and it was at a show called Natural Inclinations at the Woodland Cultural Center, and it was curated by Tom Hill. And so there's this, we were able to get this little catalog for the show, and it had this image. So this is one of the styles of gardens that he created, and I'll show you what we ended up doing. Luckily, inside the catalog was this little diagram, this plan that sort of decoded all the plants and showed us like what plants he included. And you can see it's divided into these pies. And then there are teepee poles at each of these corners. And so there's all these different plants in each part of the pie. It took me a couple years. Well, maybe not a couple years, but it took me at least a good growing season, I would say. Yeah, give myself more credit. A good growing season to start understanding, you know, what this was, what this represented in plant terms, I guess. What I realized is that, you know, each section had a plant that blossomed at a different time of the year. Like wild strawberries are earlier in the spring. And then if you get around here to the goldenrod and asters, those are very late fall blooming. And so in terms of pollinators and butterflies being one of the pollinators, this is offering food to these pollinators throughout as long growing season as possible. In the middle, you see the sweetgrass there. The sweetgrass is, it proliferates by its roots more so than pollen. That's how it proliferates. So, and then at each of the teepee poles, there's hops, and hops are also have really strong rooting systems, and they're also very good food for little bees and things. The thing about the hops is that besides the rest of the plants that are mostly indigenous to North America, the hops are not. And there's always this tension I noticed in his gardens, where there's one plant that stands out, but that serves, does serve the purpose of feeding the pollinators. So there's this consideration of all of those relationships, and that kind of kindness and feeding of it's not only about us staring at these plants and having flowers to look at all through the seasons, it's about what those plants can offer. So we replanted with Kitchener-Waterloo Art Gallery and Crystal, and then Dana in the project at York that I have called Finding Flowers. We replanted this garden at the Woodland Cultural Center and also at the Kitchener-Waterloo Art Gallery. So I'll just show this one's at the Brantford, this one's in Kitchener, and on the left is Kitchener, and on the right is the Brantford one. And that's Ron Benner there, who's had some garden work at Kitchener as well, which you might hear about a little bit later. So just giving you a little overview. But the one thing that I know is that this was not the only design. So every one of his gardens did not look like this. So he obviously had a sort of response to the different sites that he was working in. And this was taking us back to where we started at this presentation is looking at the Banff garden, the garden in Banff, which is between two buildings, and has a pathway, this sort of cobblestone pathway between it, and the garden exists on either side of the pathway. And so we're here, this is where this photo is taken late summer. So you can see the fireweed there over here in the pink blossoms. And so this garden was planted, I believe, in 1999. And when we did our research, we were able to learn a lot more about it. And let me just pull my notes. And thanks to the work of Catherine Latallo, who I believe it was in 2012 or around that time, around 2009, the gallery invited Catherine to join the caretaking and stewardship of the garden. And Catherine is a curator who works, I think it's in Calgary. She was working at a museum in Calgary when I last talked to her. Anyway, but in 2009, they invited her to come and be part of the caretaking. And as a curator, she kind of approached this as a curator, but also as a gardener and a horticulturalist. And she kind of needed to learn about this space. So her work started by mapping the garden and finding out the many types of plants. And so this was a little out of the archives there, and at the artist file at Banff, we were able to find this plan. So there's she mapped it out. So this was the gate that you saw earlier was right here, and then this was the kind of path that goes right through. And so you can see the plants she identified in the garden. And then this is the plant list that she you can see over 93 kinds of plants that are in this garden now. And I would say that they're not all of what was planted by Mike. I think that a lot of things also migrated in there through different animals like birds and mice and things like that who carry seeds around. So this was part of what we learned, this is part of what we learned in terms, the paper kind of archive. And then we also met Catherine, And she gave us a little tour through the garden, and we talked to her about, you know, what she learned about it, what her impressions were of it. But then while we were also there, she also talked about how she put together a kind of care, a way to care for the garden. So kind of creating like almost like a Friends of the Mcdonald garden, and where she kept a bin of supplies so that people could, because even though the garden is not meant as a manicured kind of French garden, it does get overtaken by a really aggressive plants like vetch or thistle. So usually in, you know, the spring and then, you know, later summer, you know, you need to go in and sort of pull out some of those more aggressive plants. And so she showed us how she put together a bin so that people want to help. There's gloves, there's different things that people can come and contribute their time. And so we did, that's one of the students we were working with. Oh my gosh. And Dana, so Dana was with us, and
Jess Buckley.
I don't know why I can't remember Jess's name. And Jess, thank you. And Jess was there, and we spent time basically kind of weeding the garden and getting and pulling out the vetch, which vetch grows along the ground, and it's like a long, it has it's like viney, right? It's viney, and it gets in there, so it kind of creates a covering almost over other plants or over the base of other plants. So we started, we picked a lot of thistle out of there, and we picked a lot of vetch out of there. And it was, you know, kind of rainy, and it was kind of whatever. It was like, you know, it was like work. And what we did was, we just decided that we wanted to like make something with these plants. So we ended up, without having brought any supplies with us to Banff, we took apart some canvas bag that I had, and then we created some dye baths, and we made vetch and thistle dye baths, and we still have these fabrics that we're probably do something with eventually, but we wanted to kind of gather an infusion, right? Gather an infusion from that garden. And in those ways, beyond like looking at the archive and looking at the paper archive and talking to Catherine, we started understanding more about like what this artwork, what taking care of this artwork meant, and what like being in conversation with it meant. Whoops. I think that's all I want to share right now about this. And I guess I would emphasize that there's so much more to learn about these plants. And what we did take away also from this garden and this garden is that we planted a garden at York University called Everything We Learned About Mike Mcdonald's Garden. And we designed it in a way that was similar to this, with a path. So we made a strip of garden that went along a path, and that goes into this garden called Maloka Garden at York. And we used the plants that that were in this garden, with the strawberry plant being the first one to blossom. And so we have that at the east end. So when you enter the garden, like it's the place where the sun comes up. And so that was sort of that composition of that garden. And those plants are thriving now. Okay, so that's what I have. And so I guess what I wanted to open up with was that thinking about how that work, you know, really made me think about the plant's role and my role in relation to plants, and the way all of the sort of beings and the life and the ecosystem and the pace at which all of those things interact. And so thank you for listening, and I'm going to turn it over to Ursula if you would like to go next.
Thank you, Lisa. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, just 1 second. I'll pick up the screen share over here. Actually, before I screen share, was a good way possible to chip about me off is a pissing cook. Good way out there. We do it muy near just as only living in a meagama. Nigma book cheese up, bohadlana. Don't go your weed, cook. Book chitan is a daily die, I'll tell the way. Wadasi gizi gludam dan koi del lugay. Walasi sa gizma uya bohanum toltik ju chikimanatan gidnamadijik. Bohanumuga kijiduk dan milida hanel dugal bohanumasudiadik nemiduk. I just need to give my protocol greeting before starting. And so I'll give a basic kind of introduction or a basic kind of translation of what I just said. So I introduced myself and from the territory that I'm from. My name is Ursula Johnson, and I'm Mi'kmaq, originally from Unama'ki territory. Mi'kmaq territory is the entire eastern seaboard of Canada, including a part of the northeastern United States. And the territory I'm from is Unama'ki, which is Cape Breton Island. And I also gave you my clanship. So my two main clans are the Mouse Clan and the Wood Spirits. And so I also acknowledged our speakers that are here today and also our witnesses and our listeners. And I also said that I'm very grateful to be here to participate in this format, in this forum. And I acknowledge that this is a very different way of working, but as artists and makers and producers, we have learned to overtake these challenges and to just kind of roll with it and to create new ways of communicating and interacting. And so I'm just giving a big up to all of you for everything that you do on your day to day and continue to make and share these important conversations that we're having. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to share some of my ideas I've been thinking of in my own practice. Can you see my screen share, or is it just all black?
It's all black.
That's what I thought. I'm like, where did it go? We had it there a few minutes ago.
We can see your
share.
mouse cursor.
You could see my cursor moving. Okay, so then there's hope yet, because it worked a little while ago. So let's try this again. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Cross your fingers, everybody, not just me. It keeps saying unable to connect to Zoom. Okay. It's always that, it's the awkward quiet.
Yeah, I mean, I could.
That doesn't work.
Someone's saying sharing from Safari.
Oh, no, you don't have to feel the awkward quiet.
Oh, no, but I was just going to say,
I think it's just funny.
Someone's saying sharing from Safari and Chrome is really hard. Try Firefox. I don't know if that helps at all.
I'm not sharing anything from the internet, so thank you. I'm trying to share I'm airplaying from my iPad, which worked earlier. Okay. I think what I need to do is make sure that I'm on the Wi-Fi. Okay, AirPlay. That's so strange because it worked a little while ago. This is usually how it goes when you have an interactive presentation and then your interaction's like, no, you have to rely on the internet to use sharing data. So luckily, I like having backups. So this will be my backup. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so I can't see what you see, so I'm just going to try this out.
We can see the browser and the video. The video seems to be in a freeze frame.
What's that, Lisa?
The video's freeze frame for me, and I can hear the audio kind of far away.
Okay. So
if you go out of share screen and then share screen and make sure you share audio, it might help. I don't know if that helps. Yeah. Okay.
I
cool.
did that.
가도 덧담에는 갈만하지.
Okay, you know what I'm going to do?
오렌지도.
Oh, somebody's there talking. I saw someone's beard.
Yeah, I just hit mute for them.
Okay, well, luckily, we'll just kind of roll with the punches. So everything should be on. Looks like I'm looking up to the sky for help. But I was looking up to the other monitor. There is the MIIJIM photos, screen share. So if my video doesn't work, then I'll just go to the images. Can you see my images?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. And where's the preview now? Can you see that?
Yep.
Can you hear it?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to shut off that sound because that's something weird that happens with Macs. They're just like, oh, I'm just going to make some music to add to your pictures. So you guys, I'm going to start all over again now. So initially, what I was going to do was I was going to play an excerpt from the TED Talk where I talk about what my grandmother has talked about. And basically, I'm kind of going back through time, and I'm going to be flipping through a couple different things within kind of a storytelling format. And I can't see the chat, but I will look at the chat after those images. They'll just keep running through. So a part of the thing that I thought was really interesting within this conversation about gardens and creating as a studio producer, because I don't really work a whole lot with gardens or plants. I did study a little bit in textiles with regards to natural dyes. But then I very quickly veered away from it because I became very interested in what my family was doing and kind of the pedagogy outside of the art school that existed within my family, because my family are basket weavers, and they had been working for a very long period of time on learning the materials that they're working with. And my great grandmother, Caroline Gould, who was a very well-known basket weaver, she used to talk about how it was really important to see what the wood was trying to tell you it could do, because we often think about weaving or working with natural materials as a way of manipulating these materials. But she would tell me, she said, the materials don't manipulate based upon what your hands are doing to them. The materials actually manipulate you into understanding what they can do. So it taught me a really a different approach to working that I did not learn in an art school context. And that was listening to the materials and seeing what it is that was possible to come out of these materials. So fast forward time, I started to work with Mi'kmaq basketry. I received a research grant a few years out of getting out of the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. And I researched a concept called nedugulimk within Mi'kmaq philosophy, or it would be, I guess, a principle of making and living. But the nedugulimk is a philosophy that basically talks about self-sustainability from the forest. So in our culture, we say Naji Nedugulit Nadwin, which means that person is going to go practice Nedugulimk. And it means you're going to go into the forest and to sustain yourself completely from what is there. So you have to learn how to reuse, to have communications and relations with those beings that are out there, plant and otherwise. And to really be able to take care of yourself and to sustain yourself. So what that brought me to was looking at, well, what happens if we look at resource and conservation and notions of stewardship, but apply it to studio practice in making? There was a time when I became very engaged in trying to do every potential project, being this young, eager art school grad. And I was like, yes, I want to do that show. Yes, I want to be in that festival. Yes, I want to do this. I'm going to apply to every single thing. And it was really great to get out there and to do it, but it wasn't sustainable. Because it came to a point when it was too much that was going on. And when you have too many different exhibitions and projects, then it's hard to focus and it's hard to see where you're going to go with your conversations that you're trying to incite. So I started looking at notions of sustainability within my studio practice, which brought me to a place of thinking about care and conservation. And so I was looking at notions of care for self, care for my body in performance and installation works, but also looking at conservation of my practice. So looking at the idea of the archive and thinking of it as a place where not necessarily a place where things go and they never come from, because I feel like when I was very young and fresh out of university, I had this almost like this really kind of rebellious idea that the archive was a place where things never left. It was its final resting place. And so I was like, oh, things go from being from like the perspective of my family's hands and what they make, for instance. It goes from an Indian craft to an art object, to a collector's item, to an artifact, and then it goes into the archive. And I often thought of the archive as the final resting place where things went from this colonial perspective, that it went there to rest and potentially to die if it wasn't taken care of. So I've been looking at this notion of the archive again and thinking of it as a place where it doesn't go to die, but a place where it goes to rest, but only for a period of time so that it can be called on again and to try to learn something from it. And so looking at the idea of like nature and gardens, if we think about this cycle, about how our practice is going and how things are moving in that cyclical nature, there's a time when things are very, very busy, like in the summer, for instance, and then the fall, there's things are beginning their rest. But then when you get to winter, it enters into this state of almost like a quasi hibernation. And so in resting in that state during winter, I thought that's a perfect time to really embody Nedugolimk. Even though everything is at rest around you, it's the time when your brain and your mind is most active. And so in our Mi'kmaq language, we have this term where we say "antupunk," right? My bed. That's so if you think of it from kind of I guess kind of like a sorry, I'm thinking it a different language, but think of it about your brain, right? So Antup is my brain, and Tubunk is the place where my brain goes to rest. But there's an understanding that your brain is not going to rest. It just means that your brain is going there to enter into another space. So if you think of winter as that time where your brain is going to rest, but it's in order to travel to different spaces and to different realms, to have different understandings. So this past winter, I went to the Queen's University for the Kerner residency. And when I arrived there, I brought 4 hard drives with me and 2 computers that had toured with my exhibition MacDonald. So the computers were from like 2011, I think. And I was like, oh, they're never going to be updated. They're not going to be useful for anything. But then I was like, no, I have to think of resource harvesting, about conservation, about sustainability. So I took these hard drives and I took these computers, and that was my residency for the entire time that I was there, was to go through these computers and to update them, to try to bring them to be working order so that they can continue to live and exist. So I spent a lot of hours just kind of watching the little spinny wheel do things. And then I also took the opportunity that I've never had, because I always felt like there was just documentation of things and then they just end up on hard drives. But I wanted to really take the time to go through the images and to find things. And then from looking at all of those images and the works that I had done, I tried to create a timeline for myself. And in that timeline, I looked at, okay, what are the projects that I did? What were the projects that I did alone, that I did collaboratively with others, or that I developed a certain way of workshopping things? Because in my collaborative performances, I often create a workshop that's designed specifically towards investigating the performance, because the performance, it's one thing. I never try to create something where a performance is rehearsed, but I create workshops so that we kind of work through different things to get to the performance. And so what I did is, in this studio space that I had invited the undergraduate students to come and take part in a workshop. It was a 4-day workshop that was based in movement and also based on breath. And we looked at a number of different movement practices from all different forms of performance art and performing arts. And then we did 4 days of very intensive movement to get to a choreographed space that we wanted. We knew we've identified 4 different movements that we were going to use in this space. We also spent a number of days walking around the campus and seeing where was this conversation going to take place with our bodies, and how is our body going to interact with the landscape, and what is the conversation we were trying to incite. So we looked at ideas about landscape, about changing landscape in order for humans to be able to use it to their advantage, and what that meant with regards to compromising the flow of nature. And so with these 4 students, and you'll see an image in the ones that are just kind of flipping through, there's 4 students. There was Leela Point, or 3 students. There was Leela Point, Lily Lee, and Lexi Braden. That were the 3 brave students. There was the 4th one that had come, but then she was like, "Oh, I don't know if I could do this. It's 4 days of workshop, a little bit too much for me." So that was no problem. We worked with the 3 because then I became one of the performers, and then we had 4 in this space that we worked with. And what we ended up doing was out in front of the residence where the original dean of the university, the house was built for them. They actually backfilled at the time. They had backfilled a river that used to run through Kingston. And when they closed it all up, the river essentially diverted itself into the basement, because you can't, just backfill this river and then build something on top of it. There was no relationship that was created with the environment or looking at that body of water and maybe the reason why that river was there. And so there was a lot of conversations about movement and constricting movement, but then also the awareness of colonial practices within building things. And so I started looking at different ways of trying to create these ideas of looking at sustainability, stewardship, and conservation from our bodies with regards to the land. And these students were really helpful in trying to explore some of these conversations. And so we created this structure that we called Move, Breathe, Talk. So for about 5 hours a day, we would just spend time where we would move, like without words. There would just be sound or music. We would just move for about anywhere between 20 minutes to 40 minutes. And sometimes there were very physical and difficult movement. And then once we finished moving, we would stop onto our yoga mat, and then we would just breathe for a period of time and do kind of like a mindfulness exercise. And then from that movement, then we would have a conversation. And then we picked up on the conversation about ideas of conservation, stewardship, sustainability, and how our body was relating to the land. And so that kind of led me to a place of thinking, well, how is it that I've been looking at the way that my own practice has developed through time? Because I had this really amazing opportunity to go through my archives essentially, and to not think of the archives as like, okay, that's finished, that's done, now it's there, but to think, well, how many times have I created a work with a number of different materials or a structure or a methodology, and then I've visited those materials or that structure and then maybe resuscitated it, or maybe even replanted it, or thinking about, this notion of harvesting seeds from something for new growth to be moved somewhere else. So it was interesting to me to see that I had been doing this type of way of working, because this is kind of the ultimate opportunity to navel gaze, that I had been doing this type of process of looking at the cycle of the materials I work with and the conversations I'm engaging in for a very long time. And it was really interesting to see that, looking at how nedugulimk, of using the materials that are around you and recycling things, and just kind of, this is a very simple kind of explanation of nedugulimk, but just to try to create something new, and the idea of production coming out of something that maybe has been thought to have gone to rest. And so a lot of the images that are cycling through here are images from different workshops and performances that I've done, and also residencies that have gone into building the touring exhibition MIIJIM, which was about specifically conservation practices within the institutional setting, and how there's kind of this almost like a disembodiment of the handmade with regards to the information that was being shown. And then there's also an image that you'll see in there that I took from the Museum of Natural History in New York, where there's a sign that says that this object has been removed for conservation purposes. We are sorry for the inconvenience. And I thought it was really kind of great to see that sign in there. And a number of the cases within the North American Indigenous exhibit were empty and things were gone. And it just kind of gave me this idea of like, it was almost like a utopian idea of like, oh, wow, wouldn't it be great if, the conservation practice was that those objects have been repatriated and they're being used by those communities and those families, and all of that is being brought back to life, and it's being sustained because the culture is needing that. So thinking about the archive as a place where somebody has put something away until they need it, and then they go to get it, because I'm kind of like a bit of an eternal optimist. So I think you have heard everything, but I'm not quite sure because I'm kind of flying in the dark here.
Yes, I think we did.
Oh, good. And you saw the images?
Yeah, it was really nice cycling through, and it was mesmerizing, actually. And your voice was really nice to listen to too. So thanks a lot for bringing up the students that you're working with and those workshop processes, and you looking at your own archive. Like, I think we accumulate a lot of things as artists if we really taking that time and making the residency in part about that. And I think that we visited at that time when you were in Kingston, and so now I know what you were up to.
Yeah, thank you. It was really I had a whole like drawing, kind of almost like a performative beginning to the talk. But things happen for a reason, and maybe now's not the time for that drawing to come out.
Yeah, I look maybe another time, but I appreciate how you talk about sustainability and conservation in how you take up your work. That's really I'd like to hear more about that, maybe in our conversation and things.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Good.
Okay. Crystal, do you want to take over the screen now?
For sure. Before I do a screen share, though, I'm going to take my cue from Ursula and kind of respond in the moment and go off script a little bit. So when Ursula was speaking, it made me think of one of my favorite poems in the last few years. And so I just want to, it's very short. I will read it here quickly before I go into talking about some of my experiences. And the poem is by Ross Gay. It's from 2015, and it's titled A Small Needful Fact. A small needful fact is that Eric Garner worked for some time for the Parks and Rec Horticultural Department, which means perhaps that with his very large hands, perhaps in all likelihood, he put gently into the earth some plants which, most likely, some of them, in all likelihood, continue to grow, continue to do what such plants do, like house and feed small and necessary creatures, like being pleasant to touch and smell, like converting sunlight into food, like making it easier for us to breathe. Thank you so much, Ursula, for that tour through your work. And it's so nice to see your face, by the way, because it's been a long time since I've seen you. And nice to see Christina and Lisa as well, because I admire you both so much and look forward to our conversation. I am coming to you all from Kitchener. I am in my office here at the Kitchener-Waterloo Art Gallery. It is, the gallery is situated on land that is the traditional territory of the Ottawandaran, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee. And it's land that was promised to the Six Nations for their role in the American Revolutionary War and the loss of their traditional lands. And a lot has happened here in that time. and I feel exceptionally grateful to be able to do my work here, to have friendships, to raise a family on land with a rich history that I'm trying to learn every day. So I have deep gratitude for that opportunity. And I'm going to share my screen now and show some images. Bear with me if there's technical issues. Okay. So can you see that stereo graphic image? Okay. So initially I had expected to use this time in this conversation to walk through a few projects and speak from a more institutional perspective, because in my introduction, I am a curator within a museum. But that approach didn't really seem authentic to me. It didn't seem right for this moment or this context. So then I thought maybe I would workshop an experimental project on magnolia trees that has been percolating for a few years, since learning that their prehistoric relations were the first flowering plants. But that idea seemed almost too nascent for the world of Zoom and recorded talk, so I nixed that right away. But I started to think then about where my roots intersect. My roots and interest in gardening intersect with creative work, and taking as a point of departure the title for the series of talks, thinking about my relations and who my first teachers were. So immediately I went to my mother. And my mother, who is an incredibly generous woman who I am fortunate to live reasonably close to, and who I see often, I see a lot less now, or have seen a lot less of, because of the pandemic and the kind of distances that it's created between us and our kin. So I went to my mom and I asked her about what it was like to grow up on her family's farm. My mom grew up in Jamaica. She was born there, raised there, and her family had this lush acreage that had been purchased by her father and planted with fruits and vegetables that would sustain their large family. And in fact, that was kind of the understanding that they were raised for, that was the way you lived. You raised enough that you could live on and share with. And so she told me, when they needed food, I mean, they had pretty much everything they needed at their fingertips, with the exception of pantry items, but everything else was there, their livestock, their fruits and vegetables, everything was there. And she told me about how her father had planted these 12 coconut trees, one for each of the children in the family. And I think I'm naturally a romantic, and so I immediately saw this sort of symbolic value in this gesture. And my mom, I think she's a bit of a romantic as well, but she's also good at providing necessary corrections. And so she promptly expanded on this for me and told me that no, it was also about the versatility of that plant. So the coconut tree can provide nourishment, but it can also provide materials for shelter. It can provide folk medicines. It's everything, right? Much like what the life on the acreage was. And I think I know very little about coconut because it's not indigenous to where I grew up, and I see them rarely. But I started to spend a bit of time thinking about coconut and how they have more in common with grass than trees. They lack the branching structure that we associate with most trees, and instead they have these palms, these kind of individual leaves that hypothetically would give us a sense that one leaf is just as strong as the next, which is for me a really a lovely kind of analogy for building a family and how you want to understand the dispersal of your resources. Coconut trees also have a lifespan that is similar to that of an average adult, so like 60 to 80 years. So all of this is really kind of seemed really rich to me. It was so much more than just about a crop that yielded delicious fruit. So my mother left all of this behind when she moved to Canada. She left behind a climate that most of us would envy. She left behind the sustenance, the self-sustenance, and it would be years before she would have anything remotely resembling a garden again. So in a sense, she kind of, her life in her immigration to Canada created this kind of bifurcation. There was the life before as a kind of palm, and the life after, which was more like that of an epiphyte. So, nearly 30 years later, after all of, what my mom's youth was, I am here and I am working at Allen Gardens in Toronto. I was the same age as she, working at Allen Gardens, I was the same age that she was when she first came to Canada. And I spent loads of time in this space in a minor administrative capacity, but, it gave me a chance to learn from the gardeners, each with their intense attachments to their respective houses, and to kind of watch people be with these plants that were really so far from their original homes. These are just a few historic images of the gardens. I was surprised to learn that the site was historically one of protest and gathering. So it was so much more than just a conservancy or a place where plants could be kept for study and pleasure. It was also kind of had a symbolic role within the downtown Toronto community over the course of its more than a century of existence. So when I would work in the garden, I was usually situated in the palm house, which is a kind of the image that you can see here. And I would stare up at these fronds in the palm house and plot how I could surreptitiously harvest what was growing there, knowing full well that that was like kind of illegal. And also, I wasn't there to do that, but they had ackee growing there. And ackee was such a fond delicacy for my mom. And I would look up at these plants and I would see the ackee growing, and I would know that the squirrels would get to them before anybody else would get to them, because squirrels came into the gardens often. And I also knew that if you plucked ackee too soon, it would result in a poisonous meal. So there was this kind of this threat of that my transgression could yield something quite awful. So I didn't really do anything. But it got me thinking about these spaces in a different capacity. I was thinking a lot about how conservatories differ from museums. They're both spaces for display and arguably growth, but the kind of thrivance they foster is actually quite different. So in those days, I was an artist. I'm not an artist anymore, but my roots are in studio practice, and I would find that imagery, plant imagery, garden imagery was cropping up often in my work, primarily in a kind of context of institutional critique, and rarely as a kind of an autonomous library, an autonomous resource of sorts. So my relationship with garden imagery was quite different than what I would say my relationship with that imagery is now. Now I've kind of, I've tried to find ways to learn more from the artists that I work with, and thinking about seasonality and thinking about cycles and the kind of timescales that we learn from watching plants. I've tried to build into my curatorial work return, or the concept of return. So I often end up kind of coming back to artists with whom I've developed really rich relationships that I hope are predicated on a kind of reciprocity, and find ways to work with them in new capacities and to learn from one another. To do work that requires a significant amount of patience. And that's one thing I think I've really learned from working on gardens and being in these kind of spaces, that the time kind of unfolds at a scale that sometimes feels like it's different from what we live at. So I'm going to show a few images of some projects that I've had a chance to work on at KWAG. There have been, I tried to do a count the other day, and I think it's something like 12 projects during my time at KWAG that have either been gardens or have incorporated living plant material into the gallery. Like, it's bordering on kind of like cliche at this point, I think, for me. So I'm kind of thinking a bit more carefully about the garden projects I take on, but every one is such an individual that it you know, in the moment never feels like it's being repetitious. So this is a project by Jason DeHaan. It's titled Future Age, and it was, for me, a kind of a special project and a really emotionally charged one. It was the first project that, the first installation I worked on when I returned to the gallery after having my son. And this project consists of a tree within the context of a solo exhibition, but it's a cherry tree, a Korean cherry tree that Jason and I picked together. And on the top of the most ascendant branch of the tree rests a gold ring, kind of like a nondescript wedding band type ring. And it sits atop that ascendant branch, and its presence becomes a kind of signal of a promise that something inevitably will happen either to that ring or to that ascendant branch. And one has to be patient enough to wait long enough to see what will happen. So we never really know if the ring is going to choke the branch and thus kind of force the branching structure of the tree to move in a more horizontal capacity, or if the branch itself will just kind of swallow up and engulf that ring, thus making it imperceptible to anyone's kind of casual glance. This tree now sits in my front yard. So 7 years later, I get to see it every day. And as a kind of a way to kind of keep the relationship alive with Jason, we have this little thing that we do, which is that I take a picture of the tree every year and I send it to him close to his birthday. And my son, I position my son next to the tree as a scale indicator so he can see how they're growing at different rates and at different capacities. The tree is absolutely gorgeous now, and it was remarkable that it survived a winter without being in the ground before planting it in the spring. This is a project that a work from a project a year later. The exhibition was titled Imitation of Life, and I had a chance to work with Toronto-based artist Faith Larocque on the creation of new work for that exhibition. And this work in particular, Imitation of Life, Mimosa Paducah, was an unbelievable test in a kind of small physical form. So the work consists of a plant, bare and simple, like it is essentially a plant, a Mimosa Paducah that would sit on a custom-made pedestal in the gallery. And the work had this physical form, but it also had this intangible property, which was care. So my role as a curator of the exhibition is often thought of as, I care for works in the space, or at least I kind of care for the kind of context in which these works sit. But my care work changed with this exhibition. So for this work, my role was to water it, to care for it, to ensure that it lived. I am not the most adept person at the care of houseplants, so this work did become a test. I spent the end of year holidays with this plant, trying to eradicate it of mealybug. I pruned it. I traveled to Lethbridge when the show toured to have the plant sit beside me on the plane. There were all of these different interactions between me and this plant that were unusual for me. I feel like I learned quite a bit about it. And for the folks who don't know very much about Mimosa Paducah, its other name, or kind of another name for it is a sensitive plant or a shy plant, and its leaves appear to recoil upon touch. So it it kind of tricks you into feeling like it has some sort of response that's more than merely physical to your touch. So naturally, people wanted to touch it all the time, which, you know, also became a concern. And then just kind of thinking about seasons and seasonality, an artist to whom I return, this is an installation image of an exhibition with Maggie Grote titled Suns Also Seasons. And working with Maggie, we found ways to create analogies for properties or presences that aren't normally welcome in museum spaces. So sunlight and gardens and living material, they weren't there in actuality, but they were there in proxy form. So there were murals painted on the walls to kind of to correlate with the windows that would be situated on the periphery of the building. On the left-hand side of this image here, you can see a collection of works, or an assembly of works from the gallery's permanent collection that were designed to approximate a sunrise of sorts. So there were proxies for sunrises and sunsets within the gallery. And then just kind of looking at like larger scale garden projects that I've had a chance to work on. This is a piece called Transmission 101 by Ron Benner. And Ron's known for his garden works, and I think this may be one of the larger pieces that he's produced. It was situated on the exterior grounds of Kewag, consisted of 3 gardens that you can kind of see here in this image, the largest of which is this massive length of corn. And around the perimeter of the corn, we can see all of the corporate or the GMO names for that particular crop. And Ron's work in general is interested in these kind of these histories of plants being exported and imported, and how they radically transform not only our systems of sustenance, but also become corporatized or copyrighted and monetized in different capacities. Here's just a few images. At a certain point in the season, this corn grew so high that all I could see outside of my office window was corn. It was just this gorgeous, like, thick wall of green. Occasionally I would see squirrels in there too. And this is, you know, one lesson that I've learned in doing a number of garden projects. Squirrels will always find a way to get what they want from your projects. So there were often visits from squirrels here, and I would have these conversations with Ron, wherein he would like lament the squirrels' capacity to kind of ruin everything he did. It was gorgeous. And then what we did, there was a flowering component within this garden project, and around the perimeter there you can see the names of a number of plants that were indigenous to the Americas, and there were flowering plants in the center here. There were also tomatoes, and people from the public, neighbors really for the gallery, were welcome to come and take what they needed from the gardens. And then I'm going to close on this one image. I won't speak a lot about this project because I think Lisa already kind of framed it so beautifully, but this project was such a lesson in what an institution cannot hold, and what an institution may not be ready to really understand about gardens and garden projects. This project was produced in collaboration with Woodland Cultural Center, and required, as Lisa mentioned, a substantial amount of reverse engineering to make it happen. Like, we were working, Lisa, you recall, right? We were working with that one image, and I still have this really potent image of meeting with Naomi on the grounds of Woodland Cultural Center, where she used her body as the metric for us, right? Remember, she was walking and saying, I'm pretty sure that garden was about 12 feet or 12 paces like long, right? And in that moment, I thought, like, this is the best way to build a garden, is to use what we have at our disposal, or at immediate disposal, use our bodies to become the kind of the metric for setting its scale and and such. So we worked with Naomi's memories, and we worked with that image and designed a garden that then has become a kind of almost like a Creative Commons project for Mike, in the sense that future gardens, future plantings will occur elsewhere with Lisa's guidance and collaboration. So I think maybe what I'll do is I'll end it there, and I'll hand it over to Christina.
Thanks so much, Crystal.
My pleasure.
And thanks for that memory of Naomi. I remember her being very excited that she had the little catalog to show us, and she was like, that just made it seem even more possible.
Mm-hmm.
That was great. I really appreciated hearing about your early years in the Allen Gardens. Christina, you ready? Okay.
I am. Thank you.
I'll
I'm just
stop
going to
talking.
share my screen because I can't do things and talk at the same time. So hopefully you're all seeing an image on a white background and not my notes that I've been speaking from. I'm going to mainly spend time reading as I go through images just to help keep myself on track. I really value and appreciate conversation, so I'm looking forward to the conversation later, but I do tend to go off on tangents. So just to sort of keep myself organized. Thank you so much. This has been really great. It's really an amazing invitation to be part of conversation with all of you. And the talk so far, I've been taking notes as we're going through, and I feel like I just already have so much inspiration and things to think of going forward. I'm Christina, everyone who doesn't know. I'm in Amaskwasky, Wiskaikan, which is also known as Edmonton, which is in Treaty 6 territory. It's suddenly, or it feels quite suddenly, to be the beginning of spring, which is pretty amazing. We went through quite a deep freeze, which is not unusual, but was very delayed this year, so a little bit troubling. So I was really appreciating Ursula's conversation about rest and winter and paying attention to cycles and seasons. And as you were talking, I was thinking, like, I feel like I'm on the verge of like this new cycle now, and really energized, which I'm really looking forward to being in that mode. Edmonton, where I am, is also in the Aspen Parkland, which is the transition zone between prairie and forest. And in a talk that I was a part of a couple months ago, I guess now, someone had mentioned that they, when you think about this expanded idea of a transition zone, often transition zones are sites for change, and often that change can be really powerful and sort of future forming and thinking, which I really appreciated hearing and which I've been thinking a lot about these days. If you haven't been paying attention, Alberta's, got its stuff. So perhaps we can pull from that Aspen Parkland energy as we go through all of these crises together. So I'm going to talk mainly about one project that is sort of an extension of gardens for me. This ongoing seed saving project that I have, that's called Seeds Are Meant to Disperse. The seeds are offered as trade or gift. And it's an ongoing and forever changing project that continues to adapt, and I continue to rethink how to sort of strategize and the way that the work strives to be sort of more aware of itself. And the way that it strives to be more aware of the ways in which it might help draw attention to issues related to seed copyright, to anti-capitalist forms of exchange, to climate change, urban renewal, food security and sustainability, and species diversification. The project really informs the bulk of my practice now, whether working with seeds or plants or gardens or not. And recently it's been really helping me think more about notions of spread. And one goal of the seed saving project is to engage with this notion by disseminating ideas outward from the garden as a form of community building. And one place where I think a lot of us come to think about where communities and gardens sort of intersect is in the shared or community garden. And I've been a part of a few different ones. My most recent or last experience with the community garden was in Denver. And I was a part of that community garden for a number of years, like 3 or 4 years, I think, or seasons. And while being a part of that garden, it really got me thinking about where community lies within such places, and where experiences of plants and growing and sort of the wants and needs of a garden might diverge. I was thinking through Lisa's introduction too of, you know, some of the sort of thinking about the response of this time that we live in right now. A lot of my thinking around this with this particular garden sort of came in this realization that, you know, like there can be some amazing overlap with others who are interested in gardens and plants, but not everyone approaches thinking about growing things in the same way. And there can also be a lot of sort of colonial thinking, a lot of racist, elitist things that are shared among community gardens in that sense as well. So my comfort levels were really challenged in this garden. And at the time I was writing for the garden newsletter, we all had to do shared volunteer hours to be a part to contribute to the garden itself. And I was working for the garden newsletter, and these are some of the headlines, which I think start to give you a sense of some of the things that I was writing about for that community. And I started to come to realize that my interest and my focus, which really I think what I mean is my politics and my experience, my culture, my background, were quite different than others in the garden. And realizing that, you know, having gardens and plants in common sort of wasn't enough for me in the way that I was wanting to engage and think about working with others along with plants. And so I started to really question what it was that I wanted and needed from such a community. I was saving seeds at the time and sharing them primarily with friends as gifts, sometimes not necessarily welcomed gifts. It was like my go-to gift to just give everyone seeds. And I started documenting that project on social media in 2017. So I started to sort of formalize my seed saving, which I had been doing for a number of years, but I started to formalize it in 2015. And this came along with wanting to share these seed packs that I was constructing by hand with others. And part of my wanting to sort of put this out in the world through social media was a way of connecting with others who might be thinking similarly about plants and gardening as I was. And also as a way to think about what it means to do things together with others across distance. If the community garden that I was a part of sort of locally wasn't quite doing it for me, maybe there's a way to reach out to others and come together across distance. And when I started to trade seeds with others from afar, I started to think about what it means to send seeds across borders. You know, being careful to get to know others' regions, where they were growing their seeds, what would grow well within them, also not to send invasive species, and to shift this mainly gift-giving exercise into something more of trade, and to try to negotiate what it means to negotiate these relations with strangers, especially as mediated through social media. I was thinking a lot about the expectations that we all have when it comes to exchange and setting terms and what that means. And I've changed the language within the project a number of times, sort of as I sort of come up against discomfort about things and really thinking through what I mean when I say things. So initially I would use the language of this project as being a part of bartering. And then I became sort of not so comfortable with thinking about barter and realizing maybe the negotiations are more like trade. And I'm still constantly shifting and changing how language functions within the project. This was the first time that I engaged with the project in a formal art context. I was invited to be a part of an exhibition that was curated by Ellen Walker at what is now called the Bose Gallery in Calgary in 2018. And Ellen had met, and I had a lot of conversations about my concerns and sort of discomfort about putting the seeds in the gallery before settling on how it was I thought that the work might be included. And I'm really grateful for these conversations that Ellen and I had, and we became good friends through the process as well. Through the conversations, I began to realize that this need that I had for the work to be in relation with others was really at the forefront for me. But I still didn't quite know at that point, like what I meant by that yet, or how I was most comfortable in working with the seeds. I came to realize that the act of sharing, so the seeds themselves, and also the information about them, general excitement about growing gardens and growing plants and saving seeds as well, this participatory element was the thing that was really at the crux of the work for me, and sort of how it is that it's through that is how it made sense to me to want to engage with the seed saving project in an art context in the first place. Because again, this was just something that I was doing and sharing seeds with other gardeners. I wasn't quite sure like why it needed to be an artwork proper, I suppose. So the image that's on the right is documenting how this work was shared within the gallery. There was a series of mixed drought-tolerant wildflower seeds that people could come and gather and take on their own. And then I also generated a zine that talks about different planting strategies, when to do so, things about the seeds themselves that people could take away with them. And then sort of extending from that thinking and experiencing those conversations with Ellen, later that summer, I started this sort of informal series called In the Garden, which was in my garden in London, Ontario at the time, where I invited others to sit in the garden and to get to know one another while engaging with plants grown from the seeds that are part of the Seed Saving Project. And together we pressed flowers, made sun prints, documented the garden in watercolors, made hand-sewed lavender sachets, and considered the ways in which plants might help bring us together. And this is one of the outputs from that series, a zine of pressed flowers that were gathered across that summer. And then in the fall of 2019, so about a good year later, I was invited by Leanne Olson, who's an artist friend who, at the time at least, was based here in Edmonton, to develop programming alongside her exhibition that was about waste at the Mitchell Art Gallery, also here in town. And I was thinking more about the act of participation and how it is that I want to engage with these seeds, and also about responsibility. In sharing the seeds over the years, I've been thinking a lot more about this notion of responsibility, again, tied to what it means to send seeds to others, as well as how we might center the seeds' needs when working with them in an artistic context like this. So much like what Crystal, I think, was talking about with taking care of plants and the responsibility of working with plants within a museum setting or a gallery setting, thinking about how it is that these seeds might be cared for in the act of sharing them, but then also as they go out into the world as well. And I really also learned so much about thinking about, and continue to learn so much about thinking about responsibility, this idea of responsibility from Robin Wall Kimmerer's writing, which at the beginning of our event, a number of people were citing in the chat. So if you haven't read those texts, I highly encourage it. I also really appreciate how she speaks about gifts as well, and roles of responsibility in relation to gifts. So this project was a bit of a first for me, where I was thinking about setting up these circumstances for others to engage with while putting emphasis on the role of responsibility for those taking part. In this case, participants were each given 5 sunflower seeds to plant, and sunflowers are known hypoaccumulators, so they're capable of taking up toxins from the soil. Again, thinking back to Leanne's initial prompt or invitation to think about waste. And then along with the seeds, everyone was given a zine that had information and prompts to think about as they were participating in planting. And then they were invited to send me maps of where they planted their seeds, with this idea that I would later visit and gather seeds from the flowers that were planted. That's been a bit disrupted because of COVID, but someone earlier mentioned that seeds continue to grow back. Oh, the amazing Ross Gay poem, that these plants will continue to come back and grow. So I can visit them another time. And as a part of that event, there was also a reclamation scientist came to talk to us about the ways that plants are being used in Alberta to clean up toxic sites. It's actually quite a booming industry here, which I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about that I will not get into. But this idea of thinking about plants as technology really stuck with me from that evening. And I really wondered what it means for us, and for artists especially, to be utilizing plants in such ways, especially as tools for reclamation. So after that talk, I invited a few who were present for it to join me in thinking about some of these things together. And as a part of those conversations, we made air purifiers, not utilizing plants, although plants are very amazing at taking up that task, but using other materials to think through how we might lean on and think about these technologies. And this is a project I am so fortunate to have been a part of this last summer, Ishtar's International Network of Pharaoh Gardens, which was hosted and organized by SAVAC in Toronto. And it's been really amazing and helpful for me to think through how it is that I feel most comfortable working with plants within an artistic sense. Essentially, this project was a networked community garden. I noticed when I first looked at the participants here today, some of you are here, so I'm glad for that. And close to 100 people signed up to garden together in community at a distance. The project was started by SAVAC in response to COVID. And the network really got me thinking about what it is that I had always missed in other community gardens, and how amazing it felt to connect with others interested in thinking about plants in similar ways. As part of the garden, I generated a series of publications across the summer to share, as well as seed packs for others to plant in their own gardens and spaces as well. And each publication had prompts to think about and do together at a distance. And I really, through this project, came to realize how much I like this form of participation, of sort of setting out prompts, sending out tools for others to engage with on their own, in their own terms, at their own time and pace. But to just know that there are others out there doing this thing along with me, even though we're not locally situated again. And I think this project with SAVAC is, I think they're planning on doing the network again this summer. So if you're interested, stay tuned and look out for sign up and information about that. It was really quite life-changing for me. And then two projects that have since been developed since taking on this garden network with SAVAC that also engage with this idea of participation across distance. And the Seed Saving Project as well has really informed the parameters of both of these projects. Both are limited regionally based on the seeds themselves and where they thrive naturally. The first, which is the images on the left, is Connecting Through Grasses, which invites others to document where it is that they planted their seeds with hopes that we can watch the spread of the seeds together over time. And the second, The Community is Not a Haphazard Collection of Individuals, is currently in process and was a little bit delayed just because of pandemic. But this project also thinks a lot about what it means to utilize plants in these ways and how we might take responsibility for seeds prior to even receiving them. Similar to the Reclaiming the Invisible project, this project also works with ideas of reclamation. And I've been thinking about what it means to rely on plants to do all this work and how we might better support them as well. You can sign up for both projects online. Connecting Through Grasses is going to begin again this spring. Again, you have to live regionally within the Prairie region. And then The Community is Not a Haphazard Collection of Individuals will start in late spring of this year. And it's for those that are living within the top petroleum producing provinces of this country, which happen to be Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec. So if you're in one of those regions, stay tuned and I'd love to have you part of the project. And then I thought I'd end by sharing this research that I'm sort of in the thick of right now, especially since Lisa and Dana's original prompts were asking how it is that gardens have transformed our thinking, as well as ways we've learned from working with gardens. So I've been thinking a lot about this idea of exchange, beginning with the trades from the Seed Saving Project, but then also extending into the ways that plants work together collectively to both anticipate and overcome disaster. And I'm looking at the ways we might learn from plants and gardens in order to move beyond capitalism's built-in cycles of economic breakdown, and looking to strategies of trade as utilized by plants and seen across also online spaces to imagine alternative systems. And this research is sort of part research, part participatory project that's being developed right now, and or at least I'm hoping as it takes place, is also quite collaborative. So some of the conversations with others are beginning this week. And I'm really looking forward to learning from others and their experiences as well, of thinking about how we might sort of rethink this idea of essentially boom and bust cycles. And then I also thought I would share, because I never have before, some of the trades that I get with the Seeds Are Meant to Disperse project. I think of everyone who takes part of this project as collaborators. And someone recently asked me, what sort of things people trade. And I had never thought to sort of put them all together in one space before. They're all archived on the social media page for the project. And this is only a very small few of them that I gathered that are sort of more recent. But it's really amazing to me and wonderful, the things that people send in exchange for these seeds. There are things like ceramics, other seeds, zines, cyanotypes, sun prints, handmade paints, stickers. It really has been truly amazing. And then the way, so just so that everyone knows, the way that the project sort of works, at least right now, people get in touch that they're interested in having seeds or engaging in trade. And then I ask them a few things about what they need, like what sort of things they might want to plant, where it is that they're located regionally. And I do a bit of research about what will grow well there or not. Like, is it a drought tolerant needing kind of place or not? Whether they're growing in ground or indoors or outdoors in pots. And then I select a bunch of seeds and make seed packs for them and send them out. And then ask that they wait until they receive their seeds to think about sending their trades in return. Again, to really think about this idea of the value and potential of seeds themselves and what that is worth to them, and also what where that responsibility and thinking also lies for them individually. And then I thought I would just end on some images of like seed saving itself. So one of the things I look most forward to winter for is a time to actually process the seeds that I've saved and collected over the summer. So I essentially have like tons of paper bags filled with dried flower seed heads that I've been going through in the last couple of weeks. So the image on the left is some of the seeds that have been gathered. This was from my garden in London, Ontario. And then the top right is wet processed seeds, so not so pretty to look at necessarily, and happens right in the moment. So those are things like tomatoes and things that are produced like a wet gel around the seeds themselves, and then seeds drying in the very bottom. Thanks. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm really looking forward to talking with everyone more.
Thanks, Christina. I just want to check in with you because we're all of you that we're at almost 4:30, which was the time that we were going to finish. But I wonder, are you all okay with time, that we could just take more time, like pretend we're growing a garden here, or something's growing and it takes longer than you think. So that we can have a conversation and have a little talk. I think this question that I asked for us all to sort of think through around transformation and how maybe we've, what we've learned, or what's transformational informing us and informing us is, and some of the things I saw in each of your talks was ideas of relationship and reciprocity, the relationships and intergenerationally, like just thinking about your grandma, Ursula, and Crystal, your mom, and then thinking about all the relationships that you've built through the seed sharing too, Christina, are some of the threads that I see that connecting here. And I wondered if anyone else wanted to sort of add to that, or see any connections that you wanted to comment on each other's talks. I know that one thing about Mike Mcdonald's gardens was I thought I was going to plant these gardens across the country, and then we'd have a garden, and then we'd do stuff around the garden, like bring people together. And then I realized, no, it is the actual act of planting and learning about the gardens and all the relationships around them that is the kind of more transformational or relationship oriented, that I learned a lot from, I guess I would say. I didn't know if you had any other thoughts about each other's talks.
One of the things I've been thinking about with regard to this idea of relationships too is how everyone has been talking about relationships that expand and extend across time, which I really think is also an interesting thing that comes from working with plants and gardens. It's not necessarily just like the one time coming together and then maybe you never see one another again, but knowing that the plants that you share are also continuing to grow. Or Crystal, how you were talking about the cherry tree, which I just love, and the idea of this relationship expanding across time as well. And then with Ursula thinking about archives and the way that we think about our relationships also to artwork as expanding and existing across time, which I think we often forget about as artists too, to think about the fact that the things we do might still be around afterward. And then thinking about the Mcdonald gardens in the same way of you picking up this work and this research and like looking back. I think Crystal used the phrase reverse engineering the gardens themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I realized when speaking about Mike's garden, the garden that Lisa and I had a chance to work on at KWAG, that I neglected to mention like one kind of critical piece of having that garden come together, and it was having Ron there as a transition. So the area on the exterior grounds of KWAG where Ron Benner's garden was ended up being transformed, turned over, and then the home for Mike's garden. And we brought Ron back in to help with some of that work. I think he was quite eager to do that because he was friends with Mike, and there was all of this knowledge and insight that we gained in the process of having that connection to the artist who was no longer around to be able to share that wisdom with us. That was a really special experience, but also realizing like there are no superstars in making a garden together, right? Like it's kind of like the palm frond, right? You don't have branches that sustain more weight than everyone else. Like when you're in that space together, building the thing together, everyone's labor is somewhat somewhat the same in terms of its value. At least that's what it felt like for that project.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I was, when initially, when Lisa had asked me and Dana to be a part of this conversation, I was like, well, how am I going to fit in this conversation? I don't work with gardens. I don't make gardens. And so I was trying to think about, just kind of like the concept of like growth and production within gardens. And it's really the archive that kind of like ties that in, because the archive, if we think about the archive as like a place that all the other work is kind of it's made, but that archive is almost like a house for the detritus of the work, because it's not the documentation necessarily or the work itself. It's everything that has fallen off at the end of the season that goes into the archive. But the archive is the place that is arguably more important than the works produced. People would be like, no, the work produced is more important. But the archive is the thing that stems the information, the knowledge, the history, and the practice of archiving is a very new practice as far as humanity is concerned. But agriculture is a very old practice, and collecting of seed and growing in order to sustain oneself is kind of the original archive, right? And this idea of transferring knowledge and information with seeds and across boundaries is something that is such an old practice. It's a fabric of what culture is, just like art and music, all of those things that help to create our cultures and our civilizations. But then we have this archive, which is a very kind of a colonial notion, or the structure of like, we're going to make rows and everything's going to be put in these very specific rows. But in looking at these gardens and, the ones that kind of like are more feral gardens or like wild gardens, where it's not you're not trying to force nature into a structure that you're imposing. Nature is finding where those relationships and those companionships are. And I think it's something that's was very interesting to me to try to kind of link those two things together. And I thank you, Christina and Crystal, for your words, and to hear all of the different, very kind of activist and very hands-on approach with regards to engaging in these conversations, because I feel like it can lead us into all kinds of different conversations that maybe, stem into ideas about colonization or deconstructing relationships within this colonized structure and the institutions that we work with or in.
Yeah, that around archive is really interesting. Just thinking about, because thinking about archive and also thinking about collections, museum collections, right? And thinking about taxonomies too. I think thinking of, and something that came up in Mike's work was he was planting that garden in a national park, right? At Banff, it's in a national park. So he had to have approval of those plants. It had to align with the park, biologist or ecologist or that role. And one plant didn't. And he said, why didn't you approve this plant? It was a thistle. It was a nettle, a stinging nettle. And they said, well, that doesn't exist here in this park. So you can't plant it. And he said, it does exist here because this butterfly exists here. And that butterfly depends on that. And he knew, right? He knew his stuff. And so there was this kind of, and that what he learned from the plants originally from those elders out in BC, and then that transfer, like that knowledge of plants in a way is a building, and these gardens are a building of a kind of maybe archive, if that's the right word. And it starts like dissipating, but that's a way that he kind of challenged that institution. And I think it's kind of interesting in thinking about it as an archive and knowledge and holding knowledge, There's another question that I had, and there's this quote from Mike, and I'm going to quote, I'm hopefully providing a space where people can focus on and think about questions that I feel we need to think about so as to come up with some better alternatives. And he was referring to the reasons why he plants these gardens, the gardens that he plants across the country that, and, getting people to slow down and think about things, and what Andrea had mentioned to me about like making a different world, making the world different. And from an Anishinaabe perspective, I think of plants as some of our teachers. So I was just wondering if you wanted to just kind of speak to, you talked a lot about what you learned, but I wanted to understand maybe more about how maybe points of how your relationship with land has, and caring for gardens has taught you. Maybe if there's something that you didn't mention, or if there's something that's come out of a little bit of a conversation here, if you wanted to just relate to that quote or relate to that idea.
Yeah, maybe, I think, so for me, like really looking closer and taking time and being responsive. And as we've been having this conversation, I've been thinking so much about how this idea of slowing down really has come through everyone's conversations and presentations, and how very much for me also, like I think working with seeds and plants and gardens really does make me slow down. And I'm really grateful for that. But how that slowing down isn't like the same as inaction, and how it's actually like also goes hand in hand with being responsive. So responsive to seasons, responsive to the needs of plants, to shifts in weather. And then I love this Mcdonald quote that you just gave, which also gives a sense of like, it is a chance to sit and slow down, but also to really reflect on how that might lead to some change. So yeah, I'm just thinking a lot about that idea of slowing down as being like actually an active action.
Yeah, response and responsibility.
Yeah.
Christina, your thoughts make me think of something that Ursula said earlier too, in reflecting on a dormant season, right? And that dormancy is not the same as death. It just means you're living differently. And I think like working in proximity to gardens or caring for gardens is certainly one way to kind of learn that or to witness that firsthand. I think I mentioned earlier, I'm not like a big fan. I'm not good at caring for houseplants at all, but my house is filled with them. And part of that is because I've been able to learn from a partner who is really good at caring for plants. But one thing I learned probably about a decade or so ago in relation to dormancy and death was around orchids. And I have about 10 orchids at home, and all of them looked like they were dead at some point. And, they were tossed out from like a garden center because whoever it was that was caring for them didn't recognize that they had just gone dormant. and, he was able to snap them up and care for them and trust that they were going to come back. And sure enough, they did. And I think like that relationship for me personally has been one to teach me to honor cycles in relation to that plant's life. And so now we have this, I love like rituals, right? So now I have this ritual with my orchids where every New Year's Day they get like a spa day, and they get their bark changed, and they get their leaves wiped down and cleaned, and they are ready for a year ahead. And I am convinced that showing them that gratitude and that attention has been able to yield a kind of a more vibrant life for them. So anyway, that's my my trust in that things will return. Right?
Wow. For someone who says they're not good with plants, you sound very nurturing. Like I was like, I want to be a plant at Crystal's house.
Orchid spots.
But maybe that's why you're so humble about it. It's like you gotta keep working at it because you don't. Yeah.
There is a plant at KWAG. It was a large rubber plant, and we were going through a renovation. And when I first started working here in 2005, that plant was here. And I remember looking at it thinking, wow, that thing looks like it's been here for a long time, sitting at the same window. And, 15 years later, it was still there. It's still alive. And we had gone through various staff who at different points had said, I don't know if anybody's actually taking care of that plant, or if nobody remembers watering this plant. And when we went through the renovation, there was no home for it. And I remember thinking, there's no way that plant is just going to be evicted as a result of having there being the appearance that there's no space for it. And so it now lives, it's thriving in my house. It's still, 10 feet tall. But I'm convinced that everything does have a place, and that plants can be salvaged and repositioned in a place that's willing to let them thrive.
It makes me think also, like, thinking about that dormant state, and trying to recognize whether something is alive or not. I was thinking about like the wood that you use, Ursula, in is it ash in the basketry? I was just thinking about, like, I worked with Luke Parnell, who's a carver from Prince Rupert, and I remember the first time exhibiting some of his work, which was a carved pole, the first pole he carved. And when it was in the gallery for a day or two, it started cracking, and I just like was panicking. I was just thinking about it's like, and I was like phoning him like, it's cracking, and he's like, don't worry, it's alive, it's going to do that, it's going to transition to the humidity or whatever's happening in there. And just thinking about that, like, for like its liveliness, I'm sure the basketry and the ash must also do that, right? And so there's this kind of live being alive, but not, no, it doesn't. Okay.
Well, it's very different because the way that we work with the ash, it's processed so that we actually separate the growth rings.
Okay.
So the growth rings of the tree are separated, and it's black ash that my family works with, which is it's actually endangered now because of the emerald ash borer that's coming into our territory. But the black ash that we use, it's pounded to separate all of the growth rings. And people that are really skilled in processing the ash can actually, from one of like the visible growth rings, it can be separated to anywhere between like 6 to like 10 slivers that are like almost microscopic. So because you're separating the seasons, when you're separating the growth rings, then the wood doesn't splinter and crack. But if somebody who doesn't understand that relationship and to know how to use the seasons in the processing, then you get all kinds of splinters and all kinds of things. And people try to hide it. They're like, oh, we'll just take some sand to that. We'll just sand those splinters out. But people that know and understand the material and how to process it see it. Wow. So there's like a whole There's almost basically like an entire history of processing those materials and working with that material, because that particular tree, both ash trees, black and white ash, we don't have mountain ash here, but the black and the white ash for Mi'kmaq people is actually our creation story of where we come from is from the ash tree. So men and women were brought by Guskap, who is our, kind of our main deity, I guess, that he woke us from those trees. And so the relationship between the ash tree and the Mi'kmaq is very intrinsic, because we're the same, we're one in the same. So people that work with that material say that in understanding that material in that tree, you have to have a true understanding of self, because you are that tree and that tree is you. So it's kind of like, there's a number of guiding principles and philosophies that we have that are embedded within our language. And one of the terms that I had actually used in talking about kind of that relationship, where I kind of, very loosely translated to self-sustainability, is the term Nedugulim. And somebody had asked in the questions, about that term.
Yeah.
And one thing that that I've been taught is very important is these terms, because they're principles and philosophies that are values to our culture from our language, it's not to be appropriated by people to say, I'm practicing this. And it's like, well, unless you are Mi'kmaq and you speak the language, you can't adopt a principle and a value from it, because it's essentially a part of that culture. But what you can do is you can take that principle from our culture and see it reflected in your own culture, and know what your principles are and what your own values are and your own philosophies from your culture, and to see that they're all mirrored, because every culture in the world has a principle that is about responsible harvesting and self-sustenance from nature. We just have to rediscover what those relationships are.
Yeah, and like I really appreciate you explaining that, and I was also kind of understanding of like that term is connected to a whole, a larger knowledge system. So it's not about plucking something out to like apply it to something else. It's about acknowledging its connection. I guess what you were saying, that kind of a philosophy, but also it kind of relates back to what you're saying about ash trees and creation stories, and like all of those things could be connection to. Yeah. So that's really
and just for point of interest, I'll drop a link in the chat box to actually we have almost like a resource conservation, kind of like a Department of Natural Resources for Mi'kmaq people. And they talk about that term and about using that term in regards to stewardship and conservation practices, and how they're using it from an integrative science perspective. And it's also used within the university, because we have, it's called the Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources, but then we also have Unama'ki College, which houses our integrative science program. And so they look at Western science and Mi'kmaq science to bring them together in that format.
That's great. I think actually I saw a poster from that organization. It had a language on it, and recently. Thanks a lot, Ursula, for that. I'm wondering if there are any other things that you'd want to offer the audience about in relation to a process of working with trees, plants, gardens, archives, or all of these things that have helped you think about care. Like any last thoughts that you'd like to share with people that are here about care?
She's looking at you, Crystal. I can see her looking at you.
I think she's looking at all of us, but
we've already talked a lot about it, so I guess but I feel like departing words are in the nice way. Yeah.
I don't think there's a manual for what care looks like in our field other than, attention. And well, maybe, yeah, I don't know, maybe it's actually what care looks like for plants, truly, right? The attention, the recognition when sustenance is needed, the illumination, I guess the one thing that has been a really kind of hard lesson to learn working in institutions and trying to find ways to make visible care is that it takes so much longer than what our institutional timescales want to see.
Mm-hmm.
So, institutions have a tendency, and I'm speaking primarily of museums here, have a tendency to want to place things in the past really quickly, and want to kind of, in some ways, rush through the present so it can quickly become the past, right?
Wow,
the past is easier to organize than the present, right? So, when dealing with an archive is very different than being with people in real time. And so trying to slow everything down, which is, what Christina spoke to so eloquently, what Ursula reflected on so beautifully, like that is what we have to do, is figure out how to slow everything down. At least that's where I'm kind of seeing it from.
Yeah, I think I'm learning that with the replanting of these gardens, or even trying to figure out how to do that. Like totally, that is so true. Any other last?
She's looking at you, Christina.
Thank you for egging each other on. I
feel like I'm also just pausing so much too, because it's such an important question. I feel like care is like the thing that everyone really truly, like, beyond what any of us could even sort of imagine, like, really need right now. So yeah, I'm like, I'm sort of lost for words because I'm stuck thinking about how important it is. But I do think this slowing down and making visible that Crystal was just talking about, like not only what is needed, but how to get there, and making that a priority is just so critical, and sort of something that's just so lacking in society kind of in general, at least the society we all like kind of are forced to live in. Yeah, so I hope, like, whatever the thing is that and whatever the way that care is needed, like, that people have the time to really even recognize it and have access to it, because clearly it's lacking.
Yeah,
in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And maybe before Ursula says what she's going to say, people could just put what caring is in the chat. Everyone wants to write something about care in their own terms. But Ursula, are you there?
Good prompt. I'm here. Is this the time for the seance?
I don't know. Why is there?
Ursula, are you there? Can you hear me? If you can hear us, say something.
There is something like I'm getting mesmerized by something.
My camera is disconnecting.
Okay.
But what I would like to say is it reminds me what hearing Crystal and Christina talk, as my little head spins around here on the camera, is it reminds me of something that my wife and I both wanted to kind of we moved in 2018, just a couple of years ago. We bought a little property. We're very excited. We moved to the country, away from the city, and we bought just 1 acre and a house in the country. We're like, we're going to garden, we're going to grow everything, it's going to be so amazing. And we arrived, and we knew that the people, decades ago had horses, so we knew there was manure and it was very rich in the soil. And then I started thinking about how it was not just the soil, but it was also the light and the water. So then we agreed that we were going to slow down and not jump into making a bunch of garden beds everywhere right away. So we spent the first year actually looking at water and light on the property and seeing where there was water naturally pooling, where there was the most light, which plants needed more light, kind of absorbing everything that was happening all around. And then this year we finally built the garden beds and we planted things, but we got a bit of a late start, and then we had a very late frost come, which was kind of scary because then for about a week every night we'd be like running outside to cover things up. And so it really kind of it really taught us that it's really important to just slow down and to think, what are we doing, why are we doing this, and what are we hoping to get out of it. But it makes me think about something that a colleague of mine had said. And he said, there's a common misconception that when we're gardening, we're growing plants. But you're not growing plants. You're making soil and you're growing insects. And the plants, which is also the food, is just the byproduct of healthy insects and healthy soil.
Nice. I like that. And the soil, it reminds me of something a person told me too, is that, well, this might be not a good, anyway, it's that, the soil is part of us too. Like we end up in the soil at some point. And so there's something kind of nice about that idea of growing that. People are adding their points of caring in the chat too. That's good. Thanks for sharing that, Ursula, MIIJIM, and thanks, Crystal, and thank you, Christina, and thank you, Andrea, who I saw this is here, and I know that is listening to us. It's really, I'm really happy to been in conversation with everybody today, hear your presentations, hear about your work and the things you're doing. It's been a very dreamy time. As Dana and I were chatting back and forth, just not all, through the whole thing, obviously, but just a few comments to each other, just like we want to stay in this on this Zoom call forever, and that doesn't come up. That we don't say that very often, especially these days when, Zoom is so much of what we do. I just want to, thanks, MIIJIM, so much. I guess this is the end of our time together, and I really appreciate it. And I hope it's the beginning of more conversations with you all on these topics. And I just also want to acknowledge some of the work that was happening around Mike McDonald's gardens was with my class, and we made a collective, the Storm Petal Collective. So I just wanted to, I saw some of the members of that collective here, so I wanted to acknowledge that. Acknowledge them and say hi, and let my students know that we'll be meeting at our usual link and in a few minutes. So MIIJIM, take care, and even though I don't want it to end, I think we're ending. Yay!
Thank you so
Awesome.
much for organizing and bringing everyone together. This has been really amazing. And to everyone for being here too. I really appreciate that so many were a part of the conversation and taking part.
Yeah. Yay.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.